The $1.6 trillion trade fraud. How the hidden money flows. Imagine a container ship docking at the port of Rotterdam. Customs officers inspect dozens of crates labeled medical equipment. Lights, syringes, stethoscopes. The bill of lading, stamped by a small trading firm in Singapore, lists the value at $2 million. Customs officials calculate import duties based on that price and release the goods. But the real story is far more insidious. In reality, the medical equipment was manufactured in China at a cost of $10 million. The extra $8 million has quietly slipped into offshore accounts, funding everything from drug cartels in South America to political insiders in Eastern Europe. This is not a hypothetical. It is a real scam known as over-invoicing, one of many trade-based financial crime, TBFC schemes that launder approximately $1.6 trillion every year, roughly the size of Australia's entire economic output. While headlines focus on money laundering through casinos or shell companies, this hidden current of illicit finance flows through legitimate trade channels, hiding in plain sight. A simple paperwork fraud, misreporting the price of goods, can turn an ordinary-looking transaction into a massive conduit for dirty money, financing everything from terrorism to environmental destruction. In this video, we'll embark on a journey behind the scenes of global trade to expose TBFC's secret corridors. We'll begin with a seemingly innocuous electronics shipment from Dubai to Lagos that becomes a cover for terror financing. We'll unravel the mechanics of over and under invoicing, mislabeling, phantom shipments, and other tricks that allow criminals to move money the same way a legitimate exporter moves a cargo of garments. We'll quantify the staggering scale, $1.6 trillion annually, and compare it to familiar benchmarks, highlighting how that figure dwarfs even many national budgets. Next, we'll traverse the globe, from smugglers in Central America using over-invoiced coffee shipments to fund cartels, to corrupt customs officials in West Africa who turn a blind eye for a cut of under-invoiced oil. We'll reveal how this illicit money drains vital tax revenue, distorts markets, and endangers security. Along the way, we'll meet whistleblowers, interview investigative journalists, and hear from financial watchdogs who describe TBFC as pernicious and underreported. Finally, we'll examine the growing arsenal of countermeasures, AI-driven transaction monitoring, mandatory trade data sharing, and international task forces, required to unmask these invisible flows. By the end, you'll see that TBFC is not an arcane phenomenon restricted to finance experts. It is a global threat that undermines development, fuels conflict, and erodes trust in the entire financial system. The next time you hear about a suspicious payment, remember, it might be as simple and as monumental as a mislabeled shipping invoice. How TBFC works, the anatomy of a shadow network. To understand trade-based financial crime, TBFC, let's strip it down. Criminals exploit legitimate trade, buying, selling, shipping, to move illicit money across borders while hiding its origin and destination. Instead of layering dirty cash through banks or real estate, TBFC piggybacks on everyday commerce. With over $25 trillion of goods traded annually, manipulating just a sliver can shift hundreds of billions in hidden money. Over-invoicing and under-invoicing. Over-invoicing. Company A in country X sells $1 million worth of electronics to Company B in country Y, but invoices $5 million. Company B wires $5 million. Company A returns $4 million to offshore accounts, now clean money disguised as legitimate trade. Customs in country Y collects duties on $5 million, not $1 million. Corrupt officials often siphon off the extra tax. Under-invoicing. A commodity exporter declares $2 million of $10 million worth of oil. The importer pays $10 million with laundered funds to offshore accounts, but officially records $2 million. The hidden $8 million flows to criminal networks. High-value goods like oil, gold, or diamonds are common targets. Small misstatements hide huge sums. Double invoicing and multiple invoicing. Double invoicing. 2 invoices for 1 shipment. Invoice number 1 covers the official sale. Invoice number 2 is a service fee paid to a separate shell account. Regulators rarely cross-check invoices, especially when goods transit free zones. Multiple invoicing. A single shipment is invoiced multiple times to different parties. India exporter invoices $2 million to a Swiss importer. The same goods are sold to a Middle Eastern firm for $4 million via a second invoice. Finally, an African buyer pays $3 million with a third invoice. Each intermediary pockets differences, layering funds across jurisdictions and obscuring the money trail. Falsified origins, mislabeling origin. A container marked "Made in Germany," high duties, actually contains low-cost goods from Eastern Europe. Criminals exploit free trade agreements, declaring false origins to evade tariffs. Mislabeling. Quality, medium-grade copper pipes billed as industrial grade, 3 times more expensive. Importers pay inflated prices, and the excess is siphoned offshore. End users receive substandard products, risking safety and fueling industrial accidents. False shipments and phantom transactions. Phantom shipments, no goods move. Exporters submit fake bills of lading and certificates of origin. Importers, front companies, wire payments to shell accounts. Funds circulate through shell networks, emerging clean minus service fees. Round-tripping, criminals export $10 million of timber from country A to a front in country B, but no real timber moves. The $10 million returns to country A as foreign investment, evading capital controls and legitimizing illicit funds. TBFC versus traditional money laundering scale and plausibility. A $5 million invoice hides easily among daily trade volumes. Customs rarely verify market values for every shipment. Global dispersion. A container can move through multiple jurisdictions: China, Singapore, Rotterdam, Nigeria. By the time it crosses the equator, funds are split across shell accounts in the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and Dubai. Layering and integration. As payments flow through legitimate trade channels, criminals layer illicit money into the formal economy, financing black market arms, luxury goods, or real estate without triggering bank alarms. Why it's hard to detect fragmented data. Banks see only the payment leg, not the customs data. A $5 million wire looks routine. Banks can't easily verify if the invoice value matches real prices. A WEF survey found 42% of banks cite disconnected data systems as a top barrier to spotting TBFC. Lack of standardized valuations. Customs use tariff books with average values, often outdated or manipulated. For example, a laptop's reference value might be $300, but high-end models sell for $1,500. Criminals invoice just below or above reference values to slip through inspections. Complicity and corruption. In weak governance regions, customs officers, port staff, or tax officials may accept bribes to ignore suspicious invoices. This human element makes TBFC schemes all but invisible to regulators. In short, TBFC is like a silent current beneath the vast ocean of international commerce. Powerful, pervasive, and largely hidden. By the time authorities notice, trillions of dollars have rippled through global supply chains, funding corruption, terrorism, and illicit trade, all disguised as legitimate transactions. Staggering scale. Over $1.6 trillion in the shadows. The true scale of trade-based financial crime, TBFC, is staggering, around $1.6 trillion per year, roughly the GDP of Australia or Canada. That means nearly 8% of global trade volume hides illicit or mispriced flows. Imagine under-invoicing $1 million of oil to $200,000, diverting $800,000 into shadow accounts. Multiply that across billions of transactions, and you quickly eclipse legitimate economies. In fact, annual TBFC exceeds Spain's entire output, $1.4 trillion, and dwarfs U.S. exports to Europe, $560 billion in 2022. It's no small crime. 30% of all global fraud costs stem from trade tricks, with $1 trillion from under-invoicing commodities, $300 billion from over-invoicing manufactured goods, and $300 billion from schemes like double invoicing or phantom shipments. Why should we care? Those $1.6 trillion disappear into criminal networks, siphoning valuable tax revenue and distorting markets. In low-income countries, TBFC can eat 10 to 20% of GDP each year, starving schools, hospitals, and infrastructure of funding. Honest businesses struggle to compete with under-invoiced imports sold at rock-bottom prices. In short, TBFC isn't a marginal annoyance. It's a systemic menace, operating invisibly beneath legitimate trade and undermining economies worldwide. Global examples, from coffee to cartels. To see how TBFC affects societies, examine real-world cases, each showing how criminals hide huge sums in everyday commodities. Coffee over-invoicing in Central America. In 2022, Guatemalan journalists uncovered coffee exporters billing premium Arabica beans at $40 per kilogram when they shipped low-grade Robusta worth $10 per kilogram. Claiming to export 10,000 tons at $40 million, they underdeclared actual value by 70%, funneling $30 million per year into Panamanian shell companies. These funds financed drug cartels, from arms purchases to bribing officials, fueling violence and corruption across Guatemala and Honduras. Oil under-invoicing in West Africa. Nigeria's state oil company sold 1 million barrels of crude to an Asian trader, but formally invoiced it at $10 per barrel instead of $70. The buyer wired $7 million to a Singapore account, but only $10 million entered Nigeria. The missing $60 million, siphoned into shell accounts held by senior officials, drained over $1 billion from public coffers over a decade, funds that could have improved healthcare and education. Electronics over-invoicing to fund terrorism. A 2023 Europol report revealed a terror cell in Greece financed by over-invoiced electronics from Dubai. A front company shipped $50 million worth of chips and devices to Greece that were actually worth $15 million. The $35 million surplus funded planning of attacks across Europe. By disguising terror financing as legitimate payments, the network evaded EU sanctions and banking scrutiny. Europol estimates at least $200 million flowed through similar schemes from 2018 to 2022. Gold smuggling in South Asia. In South Asia, traders export low-purity gold, 80% purity, $40,000 per kilogram, but invoice it as 24-carat, $60,000 per kilogram. The importer pays $40,000 into a Dubai shell account. The exporter returns $20,000 in cash or commodities. Appearances mimic a legitimate three-party trade, but $20,000 is laundered per kilogram. Over a year, an estimated $2 billion of gold was traded under these misrepresentations, strengthening black market networks and eroding customs revenue. Pharmaceutical phantom shipments in Southeast Asia. A medical supplies network claimed to ship essential medicines to Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, but no drugs ever departed. Empty containers left ports with forged bills of lading. Buyers wired $10 million to Hong Kong exporters. $8 million was laundered through shell companies. $2 million remained as profit. When hospitals found no medicines, investigations revealed ties to deforestation rings and arms traffickers in the Golden Triangle. Mismatched trade data and red flags. Sometimes TBFC exposes itself in trade statistics. In 2022, Kenya reported exporting $500 million of avocado paste to the Netherlands, while Dutch data showed $1 billion imported. This $500 million gap indicated under-invoicing to move illicit funds from Europe to Kenya under the guise of legitimate trade. The Kenyan Revenue Authority eventually blocked suspicious shipments and froze related bank accounts, but only after millions had flowed into criminal coffers. In each case, coffee, oil, electronics, gold, pharmaceuticals, and avocado paste, shows criminals embedding illicit flows in ordinary trade, exploiting data gaps, lax enforcement, and corruption. Across continents, TBFC links arms dealers, drug cartels, corrupt officials, and terror cells, all while hiding behind the facade of everyday commerce. Consequences: erosion of development, security, and fairness. Trade-based financial crime isn't victimless. Its ripple effects undermine development, fuel violence, and distort markets. Let's explore the key consequences. Lost tax revenue and underfunded services. When companies under-invoice imports or over-invoice exports, governments collect far less in duties. UN estimates suggest TBFC drains 5 to 10% of global customs revenue annually. In developing economies, where trade forms up to 80% of GDP, this means massive budget shortfalls. For example, Tanzania lost $300 million in 2021 due to under-invoicing agricultural exports, forcing cuts to schools and clinics. In Pakistan, under-invoicing costs an estimated $2.5 billion yearly in customs duties, money that could have funded years of primary education. With limited tax bases, such losses leave roads unpaved, hospitals understocked, and power grids unreliable, while illicit profits line corrupt officials' pockets. Funding organized crime, terrorism, and corruption. TBFC quietly bankrolls criminal and terrorist networks. In Central America, $30 million from coffee over-invoicing armed drug cartels, escalating violence and bribery. Europe's terror cells pocketed $35 million via over-invoiced electronics from Dubai, funding plots from Greece to Germany that evaded EU sanctions. Beyond violence, TBFC underwrites political corruption. Officials skim off resource sales, laundering proceeds through shell companies. In Nigeria and Venezuela, TBFC proceeds finance state-sponsored repression and paramilitary groups. Because TBFC payments masquerade as legitimate trade, they bypass anti-money laundering (AML) systems, enabling everything from human trafficking rings to illegal logging. Market distortions and unfair competition. Honest exporters can't compete when rivals under-invoice. A Bangladeshi fabric exporter paying duties on $10 billion in shipments can't match a competitor under-invoicing to $5 billion, cutting costs by 50% and dumping cheaper goods. Over time, legitimate firms either collapse or join illicit schemes to survive. Conversely, over-invoicing inflates export figures, misleading central banks into overvaluing or undervaluing currencies. Overstating exports can lead a central bank to undervalue its currency, hurting real producers, while under-invoicing creates artificial scarcity at home, driving up prices on essentials and damaging consumers. Undermining. Global financial integrity. TBFC creates massive blind spots in AML-CFT frameworks. Banks flag suspicious wire transfers but often ignore plausible high-value trade payments. A $500 million invoice rarely triggers alarms if it looks credible. A WEF survey found 42% of banks cite disconnected data systems as a top barrier to detecting TBFC. Because trade data underpins economic policy, when up to 30% of trade value is bogus, governments can't accurately gauge economic health or enact informed policies. Illicit funds infiltrating supply chains erode confidence in the global system. Financing poverty and inequality. TBFC hits the poorest hardest. Lost tax revenue forces cuts to social services. Public hospitals run short of supplies, teachers face salary cuts, and welfare programs shrink. In sub-Saharan Africa, TBFC contributes to a 5% increase in income inequality in countries like Ghana and Kenya. Illicit flows also rob small farmers and entrepreneurs of access to credit and markets, trapping them in poverty cycles. Eroding rule of law and governance. Where TBFC flourishes, Corruption seeps into all levels of governance. Customs officers and tax officials accept bribes to overlook suspicious invoices, emboldening criminal syndicates. Politicians weaponize illicit trade revenues to fund campaigns, consolidate power, and silence dissent. In Yemen and Libya, rampant TBFC has accelerated state collapse, humanitarian crises, and conflict. As trust in institutions fades, fragile states teeter toward instability and violence. In summary, TBFC's toll is vast. Billions in lost revenue, hundreds of millions funding violent actors, market distortions that stifle honest business, and deeper poverty and inequality. Yet this silent crisis remains largely invisible, underprioritized by regulators, and understudied by the public. Next, we'll explore the actors perpetuating these schemes, peeling back the layers of complicity and systemic failure. Who's involved? A cast of criminals, officials, and enablers. Trade-based financial crime, TBFC, thrives because a complex web of actors, both illicit and legitimate, either look the other way or actively participate. Understanding these roles is crucial to dismantling this global ecosystem. Corrupt traders and exporters. At the center of TBFC are traders and exporters who falsify invoices. These aren't always underground operators. Often, they're legitimate businesses cutting corners for profit. They manipulate prices, forge documents, and misdeclare goods. Imagine a garment exporter claiming to ship $10 million worth of shirts, but only sending $2 million worth. The remaining $8 million? Laundered under the radar. These operations typically flourish in countries with weak corporate oversight and opaque ownership laws. Complicit customs and tax officials. Customs and tax officials can make or break a TBFC scheme. With a bribe or a blind eye, they allow fraudulent shipments to pass. A 2022 UN investigation found that nearly 30% of customs officials in major West African ports accepted bribes to process under-invoiced mineral exports. In Latin America, officials falsify certificates of origin. In Asia, they greenlight electronics worth $5 million when the shipment contains just $1 million in low-quality parts. Some reinvest their cut, deepening their involvement. Solutions and accountability. Building a firewall against TBFC. Trade-based financial crime, TBFC, is a sophisticated challenge requiring a combined strategy of technological innovation, regulatory reform, and international collaboration. Enhanced trade data sharing and analytics are vital. Real-time cross-border integration of customs, tax, and financial intelligence data on secure standardized digital platforms would enable authorities to detect suspicious activity, such as abrupt price changes, mismatched HS codes, or high-volume trade between unusual partners. And AI-driven anomaly detection systems can flag under- or over-invoiced shipments before schemes unfold. Strengthening regulatory frameworks further bolsters defenses, mandating digitalized trade documents, such as electronic bills of lading, export declarations, and certificates of origin stored on blockchain-based ledgers, ensures immutable, auditable records for banks issuing trade finance instruments. Requiring transparent beneficial ownership registers for entities engaged in significant trade debtors shell companies in free trade zones. And uniform tariff valuation standards with calibrated global price bands automatically trigger alerts when invoice values deviate beyond acceptable ranges. Bilateral and multilateral memoranda of understanding facilitating swift exchange of trade and financial data, mirroring FATF's Egmont Group, allow customs authorities in different jurisdictions to notify counterparts when invoices or values appear anomalous, prompting timely investigations. Industry and financial sector measures complement these reforms. Banks must extend KYC processes to trade counterparties, verifying commercial invoices, packing lists, contracts, and an exporter's physical capacity using third-party sources like Chamber of Commerce records and vessel tracking. They should integrate sanctions and watch list screening for trade partners, applying the same rigor as in correspondent banking. And public-private TBFC task forces uniting banks, freight forwarders, customs brokers, and export credit agencies can share typologies and red flags to rapidly identify emerging trends in trade fraud. On the legal front, specialized trade crime units within law enforcement, combining investigators, trade experts, and financial analysts, should build expertise to prosecute TBFC schemes, with updated criminal codes that explicitly outlaw over-invoicing, under-invoicing, and false origin claims and impose stringent penalties, as exemplified by India's 2023 amendment to the Prevention of Money Laundering Act imposing up to 10 years imprisonment and significant fines. Robust whistleblower protections and reward programs encourage insiders in banks, customs agencies, and auditing firms to confidentially report illicit activity in exchange for a share of seized assets. At the international level, integrating TBFC into existing anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism frameworks such as FATF and forming a global TBFC task force would coordinate cross-border investigations, while capacity-building initiatives, funded by organizations like the World Bank, IMF, and UNDP, train customs officers and tax officials in developing economies to use AI-based analytics tools, as seen in Ghana's 2023 pilot program, which increased detection of under-invoiced timber exports by 30%. Finally, corporate compliance and responsible business practices serve as the first line of defense. Multinational firms should conduct rigorous supply chain due diligence in line with UN Global Compact guidelines, performing background checks, on-site inspections, and ownership structure reviews to verify partner legitimacy, and sector-specific TBFC risk assessments developed by industry associations, such as ICC's guidelines for pharmaceutical exporters, should ensure product authenticity, accurate pricing, and valid shipping routes. Collectively, these layered technological, regulatory, legal, international, and corporate measures can shine a light on the hidden trillion-dollar flows beneath global trade and hold perpetrators of TBFC accountable. Conclusion: why TBFC demands our attention. Trade-based financial crime may operate in the shadows, but its impact is painfully real. Every year, $1.6 trillion slides through clandestine channels, funding terror, corruption, organized crime, and environmental destruction. Governments lose vital tax revenue, honest businesses face unfair competition, and societies endure weakened governance and stunted development. When up to 30% of fraud costs stem from TBFC, we cannot afford to treat it as a marginal issue. Globalization and digital trade have revolutionized commerce, but they have also widened the avenues for illicit actors. Sophisticated networks exploit data silos, regulatory gaps, and jurisdictional loopholes. In a world where a single misplaced invoice can move millions undetected, staying complacent is not an option. We must act swiftly and decisively, adopting advanced analytics, streamlining data sharing, enforcing stringent legal regimes, and promoting corporate integrity. Only then can we dismantle the infrastructure that allows criminals to hide behind innocuous-looking shipping containers and forged invoices. Tackling TBFC is not merely about fighting fraud. It is about safeguarding the foundations of economic fairness and security. Every dollar lost to under-invoicing could have built a school, repaired a hospital roof, or funded an anti-terrorism initiative. Every illicit transaction that slips through financing a militant cell is a tragedy waiting to happen. Our collective responsibility, governments, corporations, banks, customs officials, and civil society, is to seal the cracks in our global trade architecture before they become chasms of instability. As consumers, traders, and citizens, we can demand transparency. Insist that our governments implement unified trade registries, that banks deploy AI to detect suspicious patterns, and that corporations conduct rigorous supply chain due diligence. When you next hear about a surprise tariff increase or a suspiciously undervalued import, remember that TBFC may be lurking behind that headline. By raising awareness and supporting stronger regulations, whether through petitioning policymakers, backing NGOs focused on financial transparency, or simply demanding greater corporate accountability, we can pull back the curtain on these hidden money flows. Trade is the lifeblood of modern economies. Let's ensure that its channels carry prosperity, not corruption. Thank you for watching. If you found this video illuminating, please like, subscribe, and share it widely. The fight against trade-based financial crime is a global one. Our vigilance and collective action will determine whether we let the $1.6 trillion remain in the shadows or bring it into the light.